Imagine waking up one day and realizing the people who rule your world have absolute power over your body, your family, your beliefs, and even your life. You cannot question them, you cannot escape them, and if you resist, history will never even remember your name. What you're about to hear is not just about wars and kings. This is about empires that mastered cruelty, built power on fear, and ruled millions through violence, slavery, and terror. They seemed unstoppable, untouchable, eternal, and yet every single one of them fell. The question is not how powerful they were, but why evil always collapses in the end. Stay till the end, because the last empire might shock you the most, and you may realize we are not as far from it as we think. Power has always tempted humanity. When power becomes absolute, it often becomes cruel. Some empires didn't just conquer land, they broke spirits, erased cultures, and treated human lives as tools. Let's begin with one of the most feared empires the world has ever known. The Assyrian Empire ruled with terror as a strategy. This empire didn't hide its cruelty, it advertised it. Assyrian kings carved images of torture into stone walls, so everyone could see what would happen if they rebelled. They burned cities, flayed enemies alive, cut off hands, ears, and heads, and stacked skulls into towers outside conquered towns. Fear was their weapon. Their message was simple: obey or be destroyed. For a time it worked. People surrendered without fighting. The Assyrians became incredibly powerful, but fear has a weakness: it creates hatred. Eventually the nations they crushed united against them. When rebellion finally came, it came from all sides at once. Their empire collapsed so completely that their great cities were abandoned and buried under sand. For centuries, people thought the Assyrians were just a myth. An empire built on terror was erased almost entirely from memory. Next comes the Roman Empire, often praised for roads, laws, and civilization. But behind the glory was brutal oppression. Rome expanded by conquest. Millions were enslaved. Entire villages were wiped out. Gladiator games turned human suffering into entertainment. Prisoners of war were forced to fight to the death while crowds cheered. Crucifixion was Rome's favorite punishment. Victims were nailed to crosses and left to die slowly in public, as a warning to others. Rome believed power meant control. But as the empire grew, corruption grew with it. Leaders became greedy. Armies demanded higher pay. Politicians fought each other instead of fixing problems. The empire became too big to manage. Borders weakened, enemies pushed in. Rome didn't fall in one day. It rotted from the inside. In the end, the empire that claimed to bring order collapsed into chaos. Now let's talk about the Mongol Empire, one of the most feared forces in history. The Mongols conquered faster than anyone ever had before. Entire cities were wiped out if they resisted. Rivers reportedly turned red with blood. They killed millions in a short period of time. Their strategy was simple: destroy one city completely, then tell the next city what happened. Most surrendered in fear, but the Mongols were not just destroyers. They were also organizers. Once they conquered, they often allowed religious freedom and trade. Still, their rise was soaked in blood. So why did they fall? Their empire grew too fast. After the death of strong leaders, the empire split into smaller parts. Family rivalries weakened unity. Without one central power, the empire broke apart. Violence gave them power, but it could not hold them together forever. Few empires are remembered with as much horror as the Nazi regime of Germany. In just 12 years, the Nazis caused destruction on a global scale. They believed in racial superiority and used that belief to justify genocide. 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Millions of others, disabled people, political opponents, and minorities, were imprisoned, tortured, and killed. The Nazi state controlled information, crushed free thought, and turned ordinary citizens into silent witnesses or willing participants. They built an empire on hate, but hate makes enemies everywhere. The Nazis underestimated the world's response. They fought too many enemies at once. Their leadership made fatal mistakes, and eventually, the same violence they unleashed returned to destroy them. Berlin fell, the regime collapsed. and history recorded their crimes so the world would never forget. Another empire built on cruelty was the Belgian Congo under King Leopold II. This was not an empire of ancient times. This happened in the modern world. Leopold claimed the Congo as his personal property. Millions of Africans were forced into labor to collect rubber. If they failed, their hands were cut off. Villages were burned. Families were destroyed. An estimated 10 million people died. For years, the world ignored it. But eventually, missionaries and journalists exposed the truth. Public outrage grew. International pressure forced Leopold to give up control. This empire fell not through war, but through exposure. The truth became more powerful than the king. Let's move to the Aztec Empire, known for its advanced cities and culture, but also for extreme violence. The Aztecs believed human sacrifice was necessary to keep the gods alive. Thousands of captives were sacrificed each year. Hearts were cut out while victims were still alive. Their fear-based rule created enemies everywhere. When Spanish conquistadors arrived, many local tribes joined them, not because the Spanish were good, but because the Aztecs were worse. The empire collapsed quickly. An empire that fed its power with blood eventually drowned in it. The British Empire was the largest empire in history. It controlled a quarter of the world. While it brought trade and industry, it also caused immense suffering. Colonialism destroyed local economies. Millions died from famines made worse by British policies, especially in India. Resources were taken, cultures were suppressed. The empire ruled through control and division. So why did it fall? The cost of control became too high. Colonized people demanded independence. Wars weakened Britain. The empire slowly broke apart as nations reclaimed their freedom. Power taken without justice could not last forever. One of the most brutal empires few talk about is the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia. In just 4 years, they killed nearly 2 million people. Intellectuals, teachers, doctors, anyone who could read, were executed. The goal was total control and purity. Cities were emptied, families were separated. The regime collapsed because it destroyed its own society. When you kill knowledge, you kill your future. There was nothing left to hold the empire together. So what connects all these empires? They believed fear could replace loyalty. They thought violence could replace justice. They assumed power could silence truth forever. But fear creates resistance, violence creates enemies. Lies eventually collapse under their own weight. Every empire that ruled through cruelty fell, either by rebellion, invasion, collapse from within, or exposure of the truth. Now ask yourself something unsettling. Are these empires really gone? Or have they just changed their faces? Do we still see systems that value power over people, control over compassion, silence over truth? History does not repeat itself exactly, but it echoes. The most dangerous lesson is not that evil empires existed. The most dangerous lesson is believing they can never exist again. So here's the question I leave with you. Which empire do you think was the most evil, and why? And do you believe humanity has truly learned from its past, or are we just waiting for the next collapse? Tell me what you think.